In the attack, a lance thrown by a Blackfoot perforated my leggings, just grazing the calf of my leg, and entered the body of my horse, killing him on the spot. My ever-present friend Pineleaf instantly withdrew it, releasing me from a very precarious situation, as I was pinned close to the horse, and its dying struggles rendered such a proximity extremely unsafe. I sprang upon the horse of a young warrior who was wounded, and called to some of our women to convey the wounded man to a place of safety. The heroine then joined me, and we dashed into the conflict. Her horse was immediately killed, and I discovered her in a hand-to-hand encounter with a dismounted Blackfoot, her lance in one hand and her battle axe in the other. 3 or 4 springs of my steed brought me upon her antagonist, and, striking him with the breast of my horse when at full speed, I knocked him to the earth, senseless, and before he could recover, she pinned him to the ground with her lance and scalped him. I've got 537 pages of this, non-stop thriller action. The author, James P. Beckwourth. And among a long list of accomplishments, 2 were quite unique compared to his contemporaries. He becoming the chief of the Crow Nation, secretly, as an American, and the other leading a force to the source of the Arkansas River, which is up into Colorado pretty good, just like the super famous Zebulon Pike had done 20 years before. Scholars run from Beckwourth. His contemporaries thought him a liar, laughed at his work. Historians cringe hearing his name. Could he really fool the Crow Nation? Lead hundreds of Crow warriors into so many battles, barely escaping death every other page, saving numerous lives, a true American hero. But would anybody in their right mind use his words as a primary source, as evidence? Would a sane person believe that his adventures were truth and not pulp fiction? Is there a man who would trust James P. Beckwourth? I'm your Huckleberry. While Buffalo Roamed, The Wild Western Days of Colorado, Episode 2, The Other Guys. James Beckwourth, The Trappers and Traders, Trouble with the People, Treaty of 1851, Last Possible Episode. Welcome to Episode 2. Thank you for listening. It means a lot. And I know it's a time commitment, and your time is very valuable. I will always try to make it worth it, so let's get going. This episode is dedicated to Alexis. Thank you, sir. In Episode 1, we touched on U.S. land acquisitions, the western growth of America, immigrant movements, and touched upon the lives of rough and burly folks that made their livings in the territories, mainly the people and the trappers. Today, a closer look at these 2 groups, noting the avoidance of future Colorado's most popular areas, and the reasons why Colorado was kind of like one of the last kids picked in the kickball game, to wit. We gave most of the land away in 1851. But why? I'll give you some reasons why today. The fur trade, as discussed last episode, was huge business, starting in the east at the very beginnings of this country, before native tribes were forced westward, bunching up into one another, causing further migration for some tribal nations, again shoved west, and resulting in wars amongst themselves and against the, quote, whites, including a second pursuit of the Seminoles in Florida after their refusal to pack up, get in line, and move west with the other tribes. Relations with the people of the West in the new territories of Louisiana and the Oregon Territory, eventually California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, seemed like they were quite the game of Russian roulette, meaning once out of 6, it was a bad result. And aside from the tribal nations' oral histories, the evidence of the trapper aboriginal altercations, chance meetings, and general associations are recorded in the journals and publications of the trappers themselves, for the people kept no written records, relying on human archivists and their memories. Lucky for us, there's a bridge between these 2 worlds, Beckwourth. James P. Beckwourth, born Beckwith, just before the year 1800 in Frederick County, Virginia. His mother, Property. His father, Jennings Beckwourth, a Revolutionary War veteran and planter, who treated Jim and his other 12 children as his beloved own, of course, and why wouldn't he? They were his life. Jennings moved the family to a western frontier area of Missouri around 1809. A few years later, after a failed attempt at blacksmithing, James headed for the territories, landing a job with a big-name fur trading outfit led by William Ashley, the year 1824. Now, Ashley, at the time, also a Missourian and businessman, posted a newspaper ad, like the following one, published in the Missouri Gazette in 1822. To enterprising young men, the subscriber wishes to engage 100 men to ascend the river Missouri to its source, there to be employed for 1, 2, or 3 years. For particulars, inquire of Major Andrew Henry near the lead mines in the county of Washington, who will ascend with and command the party, or to the subscriber in St. Louis, William H. Ashley. Beckwourth didn't make this 1822 trip, but he was there among Ashley's 100 a couple years later. This is where James cuts his teeth in the West, the wilds, learning trapping, improving his hunting skills, and is thrust into battles with the people. Ashley's expeditions follow the newly traveled Oregon Trail here and there, and these men are credited for improving that route, also locating South Pass, which for a long time was the gentle Continental Divide crossing through the Rockies in modern-day southwest Wyoming. The new territories swarmed with trappers and natives, who met frequently, their interactions a coin flip, maybe good, maybe bad. The two groups had a lot in common for being so different: similar strengths and attitudes, similar animal attire, fleet of foot, great with the knife or rifle, teaching each other new tricks and ways to live more comfortably among the animals, trees, mountains, arid plains, and crystalline waters. I hold a copy of a wonderful book written by Washington Irving, and if you know your literature, you know Irving. He was quite famous in his day. A book that describes not only the interesting and new western lands, but riveting details of the ancient tribal people's activities and habits. The book's name? The Adventures of Captain Bonneville, published in 1837. Benjamin Bonneville, West Point grad, native of France, led expeditions into the territories, mapped said territories, documented the explorations thoroughly, visited extraordinary locations such as Great Salt Lake, South Pass, the Nevada Salt Flats, the Snake River, Hell's Canyon, and so much more. The book was a success, whetting the appetites for the young and adventurous for a generation or more, a pirate's life, right here on land within the boundaries of the United States of America. The trappers and traders met annually, the Rendezvous it was called, in the summertime, just north of Colorado in the Green River Basin in current southwestern Wyoming. Free trappers, company trappers, natives, all joined and hung out at the end of the trapping season. Foot races, wrestling matches, parties. They engaged in shooting contests, planned for the next year, received supplies like coffee and tobacco for the furs. Everyone involved looked forward to the meeting. Hundreds of the roughest men, different cultures with similar stories to share, and share they did. Like the people, the Americans working in the wilderness shared whatever they had among each other. Both peoples strongly bonded to one another, a brotherhood. Now for a short list of the heavy hitters, the legends of the territories of the 1820s through the 40s, from the mountaineer ranks. Kit Carson, mentioned in Episode 1. We'll be mentioning him again for sure. Captain Benjamin Bonneville. Yes, the Pontiac Bonneville was named after him, as well as various counties, towns, landmarks, etc. The Bent brothers, traders on the Santa Fe Trail, Bent's Fort. Charles Bent, first civilian United States governor of the New Mexico Territory, scalped alive and killed by members of the Pueblo tribe during the Taos Revolt, 1847. Captain John Fremont, explorer, Army officer, presidential candidate. Many published accounts of his travels and deeds. Hugh Glass, mountaineer and trapper. His story portrayed by Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie The Revenant, 2015. Famous grizzly bear attack. A tough guy squared. Jim Bridger, mountain man extraordinaire, explorer, guide. We will certainly hear from Mr. Bridger again. William Sublette, frontiersman, trapper, agent for the Rocky Mountain Fur Company, killed by Arikara warriors in 1845. Jedediah Smith, mountain man, trapper, explorer of the Rocky Mountains, killed by Comanches in 1831. Old Bill Williams, guide, trapper, helped survey the Santa Fe Trail, killed by members of the Ute tribe, 1849. And back to Beckwourth. James Beckwourth. All the aforementioned tough guys, and hundreds like them, ambled through the wilds and fought with the native inhabitants, often. But Beckwourth took a slightly different route. He joined the Crow tribe, posing, after his capture, as a long-lost son of a Crow chief. He apparently was also running some kind of fur-trading side hustle, teaching, quote, his people trapping techniques, also fetching higher prices for their furs than they would have gained without Beckwourth's influence. 9 years he lived among the tribe, marrying the chief's daughter and her sister and another gal, and according to him, climbing or elevating to the status of chief of the Crow Nation. That detail is right on the cover of the book. So, while Beckwourth's contemporaries are exploring, mapping, trapping, and fighting the native populations, James is doing the same thing, but as a, quote, Indian war chief. This is where the story gets historians nervous. For the meat of his publication, his life story, is impossible to prove, for the people didn't record the events in the same way as, say, Captain Bonneville did. Well, what do you mean? What was so unbelievable? Well, picture a 1980s Arnold Schwarzenegger decked out with all the finest gear. Little Sylvester Stallone strapped to his back, also armed perfectly, taking care of the rear. Add in a Chuck Norris to Arnold's shoulders, working his magic, mowing down countless and nameless enemy forces. Not only getting the girl, but all the best ladies. Add in a powerful, fierce, capable, beautiful heroine, and now you have a picture of Beckwourth's amazing life. Some of it, anyway. Battle after battle, thousands of horses stolen and restored, hundreds of horses killed, some eaten, that was pretty common out west. Feast and famine, nearly freezing to death a few times, bloody, and frequently at the reaper's door. Now repeat, then repeat, and repeat. This is Beckwourth. Bloody Arm, one of his Crow names, another Medicine Calf, was also a notorious and hilarious practical joker, to wit. He travels from the territories back home, meets an old acquaintance first, has said friend go to his family's house, reporting of Beckwourth's recent death by the hands of, quote, savages, getting the room good and damp with tears, then bursting into it, "It is I!" to the surprise and delight of all. Good stuff. The book keeps up such a pace, and the numbers of his victims, the numbers of battles, the numbers of horses, the sizes of villages, the distances traveled are all super high totals. Do you see a trend here? Just like today, humans gravitate toward entertainment during their downtime. The best available, right? The pioneers didn't have Netflix, but they certainly enjoyed storytelling, and trappers' stories tended to be somewhat yarnish. 2 warriors becomes 20, 20 horses, 250, 250 miles becomes 550, and so on. When your hands are constantly stained with blood from various sources, tame or, quote, normal stories just won't cut it. But that doesn't mean the bones of the tale are made up. Just the frequency is adjusted, the numbers inflated, the distances elongated. Back to Beckwourth. At last, he says farewell to the heroine, promising to return. Secretly, tired of, quote, savage life. He feels like he's wasted precious time, so he heads back to civilization, St. Louis, where he's hired as a scout and guide for the U.S. Army, as a civilian, in its second campaign against the unruly Seminoles in southern Florida. This is right about when the adventures of Captain Bonneville hits store shelves, near 1837. Having enough Florida, Beckwourth turns his face westward, working as an independent trader in future Colorado. Then he moves to a new settlement in now Pueblo, Colorado. Finally, some Colorado action. After this, he involved himself with the Mexican-American War, which ends in 1848, just in time for the California Gold Rush, which he is perfectly on time for. Beckwourth slows down in 1848, opens a store near the mines near Sacramento, and while in the area, compelled to be productive, he popularizes, some say discovers, a mountain pass, Beckwourth Pass, which shaved 150 miles of dangerous ground off the immigrant trail to California, the pass cutting through the Sierra Nevada mountain chain. Beckwourth improves a native trail along with his pass, getting stiffed for his work in the tune of $1,900, which he does not forget to mention in his book, which is written from his own dictation by Thomas D. Bonner, a traveling notary and journalist, while staying at Beckwourth's hotel, ranch, and trading post in 1854-55. The Life and Adventures of James P. Beckwourth, Mountaineer, Scout, Pioneer, and Chief of the Crow Nation, first published in 1856. Side note, born James P. Beckwourth, his name changes to Beckwourth from the book's publication onward, creating a little confusion. I stick with Beckwourth, believing he wanted to make his own name. Beckwith and Beckwourth, same person. The contract regarding the book's rights was for Bonner to pay James one half of the proceeds, which never happened. Imagine that. Beckwourth mentions geese, a very simple thing, but anybody who lives down near Denver knows that the area is occupied by thousands of Canadian geese in the wintertime, to the chagrin of most. I was beginning to believe that the geese didn't winter here, or that the people ate them all. Beck mentions geese and ducks. Mr. Beckwourth also, as mentioned, follows the Arkansas River up, that means against the flow of the water, to its source, which is near today's Leadville. The men didn't cross the Continental Divide to get there either. They went around the Front Range. The whole area would be a very big silver producer later in this series. End of note. While the adventures of James P. Beckwourth might contain some inflated numbers, and perhaps he might not have been the lead actor for some of the action scenes described, but who's there to prove it otherwise? The value I found rises from the plains, mountains, and ashes, the voices from the other guys, the people, for he did certainly live among the Crow tribal people for many years. He stipulates that the name Crow was misinterpreted by the white man, and that the name of the nation is really the description of the sparrowhawk, the literal translation, the children of the large-beaked bird. If you dig deep enough, you'll find gold in his work. He makes accurate, nonchalant statements regarding the lifestyles of the people that put you right there in the lodge, by the fire, among noted warriors, chiefs, and squaws. On the horse, on the warpath, little details that differ from, say, your Bonnevilles, Pikes, Fremonts, or Custers. For instance, the use of black face paint, applied by the village after a war party returns from a bad outcome. Many braves killed, or let's say the village was attacked, destroyed, horses stolen, basically used when the group is dishonored by another, and, along with the paint, self-mutilation. Many times a finger is cut off by a mourner. This self-inflicted pain is to appease the great mystery, or spirit, and stop the negative trend. When a raiding party returns with booty, normally in the form of horses, this is a celebration. A brave would paint the face of his wife or wives beautifully. This is a sign of prosperity, however fleeting. There was an amazing amount of horse stealing. There were even horse stealing specialists. Try to imagine a village of, say, 500 total persons. There could be as many as 2,000 horses depending on how well the group fared in raids and/or battles. How can you possibly watch over 2,000 horses perfectly? How does one herd 2,000 horses? Well, they did it. Side note. Over the last 2 weeks, my home has been surrounded by 2 female moose, a full-grown mother and 1 female calf about 2 years old. They are using an animal trail and wander for a couple of hours a day around the house, stripping sections of aspen bark from the trees and lounging around. They have left for now, and the poop around my house has me ready to move. It's not stinky, but it's all over the place. Think of 2,000 horses. End of side note. I will read from the last chapter of Beckwourth's book, which will help explain the state of tribal relations in the territories at the time the book was dictated, 1854 and 55, as this will mingle nicely with the final part of today's episode. I present you with pure gold from another J.B., James Beckwourth, in the final chapter, chapter 37, of The Adventures of James P. Beckwourth. Quote, "As an American citizen, a friend of my race, and a sincere lover of my country, and also one well acquainted with Indian character, I feel I cannot properly conclude the record of my eventful life without saying something for the red man. It should be remembered when judging of their acts that they consider the country they inhabit as the gift of the Great Spirit, and they resent in their hearts the invasion of the immigrant just as much as any civilized people would, if another nation without permission should cross their territory. It must also be understood that the Indians believe the buffalo to be theirs by inheritance, not as game, but in the light of ownership, given to them by Providence for their support and comfort, and that when an immigrant shoots a buffalo, the Indian looks upon it exactly as the destruction by a stranger of so much private property. With these ideas clearly in mind of the reader, it can be understood why the Indian, in destroying a cow belonging to white people, or stealing a horse, considers himself as merely retaliating for injuries received, repaying himself, in fact, for what he has lost. For this act on the part of the red man, the United States troops are often turned indiscriminately upon his race. The innocent generally suffer, and those who have raised the storm cannot understand of what crime they have been guilty. But if the government is determined to make war upon the Western tribes, let it be done intelligently and so effectually that mercy will temper justice. To attempt to chastise Indians with the United States troops is simply ridiculous. The expense of such campaigns is only surpassed by their inefficiency. The Indians live on horseback, and they can steal and drive off the government horses faster than it can bring them together. The Indians having no stationary villages, they can travel faster, even with the encumbrance of their lodges, women, and children, subsisting themselves on buffalo slain on the way, than any force, however richly appointed, the country could send against them. An army must tire out in such a chase before summer is gone, while the Indians will constantly harass it with their sharpshooters, and, should several powerful tribes unite, not an unusual occurrence, many thousand men would make no impression. It should also be recollected by our officers sent to fight in the Rocky Mountains that Indians have a mode of telegraphing by aid of robes and mirrors, and thus, by having their spies stationed at convenient distances, they can send intelligence of the movements of their enemies at great distances and in very few minutes, thus informing villages whether it best to retreat or not. Some tribes telegraph by fires at night and in the daytime. An officer might hear of a band of warriors then camped at a certain place. He immediately makes a forced march, and when his troops arrive at their destination, those warriors may be many miles in his rear and camped on his trail. A village of 300 lodges of Crows or Cheyenne could, within 30 minutes after receiving an order to move, have all their lodges struck, the poles attached to the horses, and their men, women, and children going at full speed, and thus outstrip the best dragoons sent in their pursuit. I have seen enough of Indian treaties and annuities to satisfy me that their effects for good are worse than fruitless. The idea formed by the Indians is that the annuities are sent to them by the great white chief because he's afraid of them and wishes to pursue their friendship. There are some of the tribes, a very few, who would keep a treaty sacred, but the majority would not be bound by one. They cannot understand their nature. At a disadvantage and reduced to enter into a compact, they would agree to any proposals that were offered. But when the controlling power is withdrawn, and they can repeat their depredations with apparent impunity, no moral obligation would restrain them, and the treaty that was negotiated at so much cost to the country proves a mere delusion. The officer having charge of an expedition against the Indian should rightly understand which band of a tribe he is commissioned to punish. The Sioux, for example, which a few years ago could raise 30,000 warriors, are divided into many bands, which at times are hundreds of miles apart. One band of that tribe may commit a deprivation on the immigrant road, and the other bands not even have heard of it. They do not hold themselves amenable for the misdeeds of another body totally distinct from them in social relations, and to inflict chastisement upon them in such a case would be a manifest injustice. But in case of extreme danger, all these bands coalesce. Other tribes have the same divisions into distinct bands, and many are hence led to the belief that each band is a tribe. The Sioux range over a territory upward of 1,000 miles in extent from north to south, and their country embraces some of the most beautiful spots in the world, as well as for natural scenery as for extreme productiveness of soil. The Crows have but one band proper, although they are generally divided into two villages, as being a more convenient arrangement to afford pasture for their immense herd of horses, and also to hunt the buffalo. These two villages are seldom more than 300 miles apart, generally much nearer. They come together at least once a year and have frequent accidental coalitions in their course of their wanderings. They speak the Groven language, from which nation they are an offshoot. The Pawnees are probably the most degraded, in point of morals, of all Western tribes. They are held in such contempt by the other tribes that no one will make treaties with them. Those who engage in warfare with the Western Indians will remember that they take no prisoners, except women and children. It has generally been believed that they never kill white men, but this is a mistake. They have always killed them. I have seen white men's scalps in their hands, and many still fresh hanging in the smoke of their lodges. The Western Indians have no hummocks or Everglades to fight among, but they have their boundless prairies to weary an army in, and the fastness of the Rocky Mountains to retreat to. Should a majority of those powerful nations coalesce in defense against one common enemy, it would be the worst Indian war, the most costly in blood and treasure that the national government has ever entered into. The coalition tribes would bring 250,000 warriors against any hostile force, and I know I am greatly within the limits of truth and assigning that number to them." End quote. Now I realize that the reading of this is slightly out of step with the next thing I'm going to read. If you heard, James mentions treaties and the effectiveness, or at least what he thought would happen if treaties were entered into. In an effort to understand why Colorado was so late to the kickball game, we know that before 1848 it was Spanish, then owned by Mexico, so it really was just only up for grabs after 1848. And the reason I mentioned and talked about all this fur trapping and fighting and the tribal people and trappers and explorers and the immigrants trying to pass on roads that became target areas for looting and theft or worse is because there was a problem out west with random hostility. The tribal people, immigrants, trappers, traders, teamsters. Blame for violence can be placed on any one of these groups just mentioned. And all engaged in moving across the country did so knowing it was a dangerous operation. But it was United States territory they passed through. And while some people didn't complain, took their beatings as it were, knowing better, others did raise hell. They complained. Indian depredations made headlines. And other than private posses, maybe a few weirdos who just wanted to kill, quote, Injuns and confiscate the property from the dead immigrants, all in the name of justice, of course. So in 1851, just as the California gold rush was really rolling, and as immigrants were heading to there and to the vast Oregon country, help was offered by the U.S. government in the form of, drum roll, and wait for it, the Treaty of 1851, also known as the Treaty of Fort Laramie, also known as the Horse Creek Treaty by the tribal signers. I hate to move you back and forth throughout time, but all we did was backed up just a tiny bit. And now to conclude this episode, I will read the full text of the Treaty of 1851. I'm kidding. I'm not going to read the full text, but it is very short. And here's a side note for the treaty. Just for some sort of detail and to honor their spirits, let me try to read a couple of names who marked an X next to their phonetic characters, just a couple, and in the episode notes, all their names as they appeared on the treaty. Is that fair enough? Let's proceed. Articles of a treaty made and concluded at Fort Laramie in the Indian Territory between D.D. Mitchell, Superintendent of Indian Affairs, and Thomas Fitzpatrick, Indian Agent, commissioners specifically appointed and authorized by the President of the United States of the first part, and the chiefs, headmen, and braves of the following Indian nations residing south of the Missouri River, east of the Rocky Mountains, and north of the lines of Texas and New Mexico, these: the Sioux or Dakotas, Cheyennes, Arapahoes, Crows, Assiniboines, Gros Ventre, Mandans, and Arikaras, parties of the second part on the 17th day of September, A.D. 1851. There's an asterisk here, which we're going to read at the end. Article 1. The aforesaid nations, party to this treaty, having assembled for the purpose of establishing and confirming peaceful relations amongst themselves, do hereby covenant and agree to abstain in future from all hostilities whatever against each other, to maintain good faith and friendship in all their mutual intercourse, and to make an effective and lasting peace. In other words, no more fighting amongst one another. Article 2. And I'm going to shorten these all up now, okay? I just wanted to give you the basic idea of just how they flowered up the beginning. Article 2. The right of the United States government to establish roads, military, and other posts within their territories. Article 3. The United States to protect said Indian nations against the depredations by the people of the United States. Article 4. Indians are to make restitution or satisfaction for any wrongs committed by any band or individual of their people on the people of the United States, whilst lawfully residing in or passing through their respective territories. Article 5. The aforesaid Indian nations do hereby recognize and acknowledge the following tracts of country. I'm going to break in here for just a second. This Article 5 is actually quite long because it describes boundaries for all of those nations that I already mentioned at the beginning of the treaty. So all of those nations have these very specific boundaries, and I'm going to read the one that pertains to Colorado. So here it is. The territory of the Cheyennes and Arapahoes, commencing at the Red Butte, or the place where the road leaves the North Fork of the Platte River, thence up the North Fork of the Platte River to its source, thence along the main range of the Rocky Mountains to the headwaters of the Arkansas River. I'm going to break in here. That's kind of back, that's basically the whole Front Range, but a line going right down the Continental Divide. All right, so Arkansas River. Thence down the Arkansas River to the crossing of the Santa Fe Road, thence in a northwesterly direction to the forks of the Platte River, and thence up the Platte River to the place of beginning. Article 6. The parties to the second part of this treaty, having selected principals or head chiefs for their respective nations, through whom all national business will hereafter be conducted, do hereby bind themselves to sustain said chiefs and their successors during good behavior. Article 7. In consideration of the treaty stipulations, and for the damages which have or may occur by reason thereof to the Indian nations, parties hereto, and for their maintenance and the improvement of their moral and social customs, the United States bind themselves to deliver the said Indian nations the sum of $50,000 per year for the term of 10 years in provisions, merchandise, domestic animals, and agricultural implements, in such proportions as may be deemed best adapted to their condition by the President of the United States, to be distributed in proportion to the population of the aforesaid Indian nations. Article 8, and the last one, it is understood and agreed that should any of the Indian nations parties to this treaty, violate any of the provisions thereof, the United States may withhold the whole or a portion of the annuities mentioned in the preceding article from the nation so offending until, in the opinion of the President of the United States, proper satisfaction shall have been made. In testimony whereof the said D.D. Mitchell and Thomas Fitzpatrick, commissioners as aforesaid, and the chiefs, headmen, and braves, parties hereto, have set their hands and affixed their marks on the day and the place first above written. D.D. Mitchell, Thomas Fitzpatrick, commissioners. Now, I said I'd read a couple of names. I'm going to. Here's from the Sioux, Wah-ha-nis-satta. From the Cheyennes, Wah-ha-nis-satta. Arrapahoes, Beh-kah-jay-beth-sah-es. Crows, Arrapahoes. Assiniboines, Ma-to-wit-ko. All right, that's enough. You get the idea. I do want to list all of these names in the show notes. So now we scroll down, and finally, here's where that asterisk. This treaty, as signed, was ratified by the Senate with an amendment changing the annuity in Article 7 from 50 to 10 years, subject to acceptance by the tribes. Assent of all tribes, get this, except the Crows, was procured, and in subsequent agreements this treaty has been recognized as in force. So there you have it, folks. I guess that's the end of the podcast. How could we possibly continue if so much of the state of Colorado was returned to the people? The Arapahoes and Cheyennes, to be more specific, in 1851. I don't know. I mean, I'm living here. I went to a baseball game in Denver once. Something had to change, right? Please tune in next time for a special episode, number 3, where we hit the streets of Denver, meet William Larimer, and try to understand how Colorado gets its start within the boundaries of the Arapahoe and Cheyenne, while the buffalo roam. Best wishes. Thank you for listening. J.B. Reynolds, copyright 2025.